Welcome to our TuneIn session today with Keith Levenson. He will be sharing information about the music business and how to survive in today's Spotify world. He is going to share examples of his work with The Who, Meatloaf, Kiss, and Pearl Jam, and how the art and business relate to today's music market. He also has many, many stories over the years from his long 40-year career on Broadway and the development of new musicals. He, of course, has a website and he is online. I found it at keithlevenson.net, and I'm sure he is all over socials. I'm going to hand it to you, Keith. We are here to be inspired as young songwriters, and we look forward to what you share with us.
Well, I think the most inspiring thing about being a young songwriter now is that uh, you can make a recording, what we used to call an album, in your bedroom. That the technology has advanced so far that anybody with a little bit of perseverance and a song doesn't have to pay $1 million to get it produced. Um, you can basically do what Billie Eilish and so many others have done, um, which is make it at home. Um, I think I think that's the good news. Um, the the less good news is that um, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Music, all the streaming platforms have what I would consider very unfair distribution, financial distribution between the artist and the streaming platform. And that's always an argument in Congress, um, and that tries to get moved ahead. But nevertheless, recording is a hard way to earn a living, and you can see that even huge uh, stars and acts are playing out live because that's how you make money. You can't count on record sales anymore. There almost isn't such a thing. I just finished last Tuesday recording an album in New York, and I do have a record company that wants to release it, but that's really all they do. They don't pay for your recording. They don't pay for your CD pressing or your vinyl pressing. They essentially are the Instacart of music. Um, so I think you need to be able to play live um, at this point to earn a living. Does that answer the question at all?
Oh, I hadn't really started with the question yet. That was just
Oh,
your
oh,
intro.
that was the
But
intro. Jeez.
but we get it. We get it. We need to play live. That's the takeaway. Um, what do you have to share with us today in terms of your experience? What have you been doing? What have you done over the years?
Everything. Um, I've been a keyboard player on on Broadway. That was sort of my start, um, and sort of graduated to conducting a couple of shows on Broadway and a lot of Broadway touring. Um, that's another area that is sort of wide open, um, and somehow that led to an arranging, orchestrating career for some specific theaters, and then for major acts. Um, I think I was like rock conductor um, of the day for a while. And I just finished up with the Who almost exactly a year ago. Um, we had been doing orchestral tours for 5 or 6 years and pretty much saturated the market. Um, I mean, we played everywhere in the States and a lot of Europe. Um, and it was great fun. It was hard having a different orchestra every night, and uh, in some cases not speaking the same language. But the music would transcend that.
I have
Um,
I have two questions so far. One, since our community is teenagers and many are considering possibly pursuing songwriting or studying music, I'm going to go back to your experience with Broadway. Like, how did you get that gig? Like, do you remember the audition, and what does that practically look like? Like, how many
I,
times did you have to rehearse every week? What were the rehearsals like? Pros, cons of working on Broadway.
well, how I got the first gig is sort of funny. I was playing cocktail piano for somebody's Christmas party. I was 16. I was a junior in high school. Um, and Paul Schaefer of Paul Schaefer was there, and at the time we were both much younger. He had just moved from Toronto to New York, and he was musically directing a show called The Magic Show, with the late Doug Henning, and he needed a sub on Wednesday afternoons and Saturday afternoons, and he asked whether I would do it. I had a little problem with my school letting me out on Wednesdays, um, for the matinee, but ultimately got around that. And so I really went from nothing to, I mean, even being a Broadway sub is pretty good news, um, especially when you're 16. Um, and then once one thing sort of, I guess when people knew I can play, because Broadway is a very small community. Um, what are there at any given time? Maybe 250 people, and that may be high, who are playing in Broadway pits. As a matter of fact, I'm sure it's high. It's probably closer to 150 people. Um, and oftentimes the assistant conductor, who was me a few times, also plays all the rehearsals, understudy rehearsals, put in rehearsals. So your Thursday and Friday afternoons from 12 to 5 are usually taken up by the cast and stage management. And the, I'm not sure pitfall, but the danger in Broadway is just getting bored. That you're playing the same show note for note every night, and then on what would theoretically be your days off, you're still playing the same show and the same notes. Um, so, but I think boredom is the hardest bit.
Did you find that there are some like career musicians that kind of just that's what they did? Like they got in there and they just wanted to have a working music job gig, or did you just find like burnout rate was maybe what, 2 years, 5 years, and then those sort of players wanted, obviously they maybe had some of their own music or other projects they wanted to work on. What was the turnaround like?
Um, Actually, the turnaround in terms of people giving up a, a seat on Broadway, having a chair, we call it, like if you're the cellist, On a long running Broadway show, is almost unheard of because you can, as long as the conductor approves your subs, you can take off up to 50% of the shows. So instead of doing an 8 show week, you could bundle it all into sort of Thursday through Sunday, or Wednesday through Friday. There are ways. Um, and actually, anybody that I know who has a chair on Broadway right now does exactly that. Um, it doesn't make the producers really happy, um, but that's a union rule. Um, and through all the years of various uh, cutbacks and new rules, that has stayed. I think if you really did 8 shows every week of the same show in the same pit, I think your burnout rate would. I think 2 years is probably a good guess.
Wow. Maliki, do you have any questions specifically? Yeah.
Was gonna ask, is why is it so small? Like, why is it only 150 people? Is it like because it requires like you to be really, really good at what you do, and then only like a certain amount of people can actually do that? Or is it just you don't need that many people?
Well, it's really how many shows are running at any given time and how many musicians are needed for each show. You could have a show like Wicked that probably has 23 musicians, and then you could have um, a show like, I don't know, Ain't Misbehaving, for example, has 6. And that's usually determined by the believe it or not, the size of the theater. That's how the union and the producers negotiated the minimum that you can have. And then there's a committee of highly thought of orchestrators who will either approve that amount or disapprove it, but rarely does it get disapproved because everybody wants the work.
And does that invite to play those shows, is that like, you said it's a small group, but is it just like it appears in the paper? Like when you're in New York, it's like orchestra needed for Amos Behaving? Or is it just like an email is sent out to primary players and then they audition? Or do they even have to audition at that point? Or are they handpicked? How does that work?
It works 2 ways. Generally, every show has a music contractor, or sometimes they're called music coordinators, and they'll consult with the musical director, the conductor, and say, who do you absolutely want to see in your orchestra? Who do you absolutely not want to see in in your orchestra? And they'll go to their digital Rolodex and dig up the people that the conductor wants to see. I would say there are very there are very well known Broadway players within the small industry, and when they retire is when chairs open up. But I mean, there isn't an ad in the New York Times. There isn't, and even in the trade publications, that's not really for Broadway work. That's for regional work. Um, an absolutely good place to get your start. um, to to get your chops together in every way.
Okay, I have one more final question on Broadway, and I'm going to ask you, is there any way that you could tilt your camera just so we can see your full face? This is more for just our recording when I clip this as well.
That
Yeah, better. Thank you so much. So if you had to say the top three skills a musician, besides just knowing how to play their instrument effectively, like there are some skills that are hard to put into words, but what are the top three skills a learned musician needs to know to excel in that environment? Because we're talking about, this is like some of the top performances in the world. I mean, that's high pressure. So like, I'm sure sometimes somebody gets in there and they're not a good fit. So what makes someone like a great person to work with?
someone who doesn't complain. That's, I mean, and I'm speaking from a conductor's point of view. Um, consistency, uh, and congeniality, really. Broadway pits are not known. They're not football size, field size. You're working in a very small piece of real estate, and you don't want to be kicking the person in front of you or knocking over their knocking over their music. I mean, I think everybody should have fun. Don't get me wrong. I think that if I'm known for anything, I think maybe I'm known for that. Um, because yeah, it's a bit of a dictatorship, but it's a benevolent one, or I think it should be. Um, but I think you can show you're a leader by keeping real quiet. Um, but as the player, you have to say, you have to learn to say no in a way that isn't offensive. It's musical and political.
Yeah, I can understand that. I've had experiences before when I wanted to work with a certain producer and sent, demos, and there was a no. I ended up working with the producer, but it wasn't on the songs that I thought. And it was just simply like, he didn't feel like he can contribute to those songs, which was all musical, wasn't about the money or timing or anything. He just wasn't into those songs, and he was into the next ones. So that's interesting. Let's switch gears to your work. I'm really curious. Maliki, do you know who the Who is in Meatloaf?
I know The Who, I know Pearl Jam, I do not know Meatloaf. Or
Okay,
I vaguely know who The Who is. I know Pearl Jam, and I do not know Meatloaf whatsoever.
well, tell us about like, what's it like working with, I'm a big Pete Townsend fan. So, I mean, what was it like working with the Who? And what was that job like?
It was as much about detente between Pete and Roger than any musical ability I might or might not have. Um,
What did it look like? How big were your orchestras? You mentioned, like, it didn't dawn on me that they, obviously, does the orchestra travel with the band, or you just take on a new
uh,
orchestra every night or every weekend?
it's a grinding job. Um, generally, we do a day on, a day off, a day on, 2 days off, and rinse and repeat. But that means a minimum of 3 orchestras a week and a minimum of, I guess, 9 hours of orchestra rehearsal. in the morning before the band even comes in. So at a rehearsal, it'll be me, um, our assistant conductor, who also plays keyboards in the band, um, our concert master who travels with us, and our principal cellist who travels with us. So we're sort of the band of five. Um, and generally it's a 1 o'clock rehearsal that I like to have end by 2:45. Um, they always get the music ahead of time. If they don't look at the music, they'll be sorry, because it's much harder than anybody expects it will be. I've seen many a brass section explode, um, because even for orchestral rock music, generally it's been pretty much whole notes in the strings forever, and you don't have to worry too much. But our charts are written by David Campbell, who's just finishing Barbra Streisand's new album. He happens to be Beck's father, but he's done hundreds of films and live acts, and he doesn't make the music boring in his writing. So there are a lot of notes. In any case, we're done by about 3. The band comes in at around 3:30, 4 o'clock to sound check, and then we just do 2 numbers, and we always do the same 2. Not sure why that is, but we do 2 numbers with the band and the orchestra to make sure that the front of the house guys can get some idea of balance between the two, because we're talking vast. I mean, for us, 20,000 in an arena isn't a lot. Um, I mean, we've played New Orleans Jazz Festival in front of 500,000 people, and it's still it doesn't change the schedule. It just, you know, you look out and there are 500,000 people there. Um, so that's sort of I mean, that's what and then there's the real the really difficult period is between the end of sound check and rehearsal and all of that, and they do cater our dinners, but you're still done by 6:30, 7 o'clock, and then you don't go on until 9. So that's a very hard 2 hours if you've started your day at 9. So you have 2 hours between 7 and 9 to get all sleepy, and then you have to hit it at 9 o'clock.
That's pretty funny. Maliki, you have a question?
For my uneducated self, what exactly do you mean by the band and the orchestra? I know that you're blending an orchestra with a rock band. Is it like there's a core band that is like electric guitar, vocalist, bass, drums, and then you have an orchestra behind that, basically?
Yes,
Huh.
And
that's that's
the band is the Who or Pearl Jam.
Who came up
they don't rehearse at all.
who came up with the idea to do that? To like, okay,
Like historically, when did orchestral rock concerts
this,
kick
this
off?
is pretty much the first time I've heard of orchestral rock concerts. So if it's a
Well,
thing, I don't know about it.
I know I've been doing them since 1990, 1990. Um, and I sort of had, there were certainly were recordings before there were live performances. I mean, like Led Zeppelin did a symphonic recording. Um, I'm sure Pink Floyd has done symphonic recordings. Um, it's generally bands that have epic, huge numbers that they will want to either record with an orchestra or have an orchestra in, interpret them. That I think is getting bigger and bigger. It's kind of like the way orchestras play with movies now. I mean, The Lord of the Rings and Superman and all of the John Williams movies, many orchestras now have that on their program where they play live in sync with the movie, and the subscribers love it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. Malachi,
I
just a
mean,
quick search.
that's a big thing now.
A quick search is saying the late 1960s and the 70s, which would make sense because like Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin and those, even arguably some of the Beatles when the rock album started to become a little more than a 4 or 5 piece band.
Yeah, well, they were produced,
Yeah.
and they had a genius producing them. Um, it was the late George Martin, and his son is still involved with Beatles music.
That's cool. So that would have, ironically, Malachi, back in the silent era film, they would often have, sometimes, if they could, a small band playing music to the silent film. And then that sort of stopped when big Hollywood movies, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but they came out and it, color and sound and you could now all of a sudden, you had advancements in microphones too, and you had scores to movies. But what he's saying now is what has come back is syncing a live orchestra with an already established film, which is sort of turning the wheel all the way around again, which is cool.
I
Yeah, the
know.
technology has improved a little.
I know that in some video game tournaments, people have gotten live bands to play the music of the video game while the people are playing, which is say a similar vibe, I think, to having orchestras perform the soundtrack to a movie to the movie live.
Keith, we have about 10 more minutes. Is there something specifically, knowing our body of students here is global teens that are, beginner, intermediate on their instruments, starting to record in DAWs, growing up in a Spotify era where you can record something in your bedroom and mix it and release it the next day on Spotify. Do you have anything else to say to that? Like what you would say to yourself if someone was there when you were a teen musician?
Oh,
What do you wish you
well,
would have known that you didn't?
how hard it was going to be.
And what do you mean by hard?
I mean, that it's a business that is difficult to make a living in, and I think if I did it all over again, I would try to find different sets of collaborators, um, because I think that can be a really important part of the process. That it's not just your own voice being heard. That that if you can agree on what to write, especially in the Broadway / opera scene. Um, I would really encourage that. I wish I had had that. What I got it when I was older, um, but having a collaborator, I think, is great, and and being willing to listen to what the other person has to say, because after all, music is about listening, and so should the discussions between collaborators. I think it turns out, much better work. So now I find myself, if I if I take on a project that's sort of outside of my professional world, outside of my paying world, um, I'm very, very careful to try to select people I think I'll really get I'll really be able to make music or make lyrics or make a show with with this person or people, and that they'll be able to do the same thing with me. I don't think I mean, I've had the opportunity to work with some really great lyricists, um, and I'm not a bad one myself, but I know there's better than me. So I, I try to find that person.
I have a question about your process. I know that you're working as a, well, correct me if I'm wrong, as a conductor and director of an orchestra. You're also arranging the pieces. So in your writing process, are you using certain software first? Do you do everything on paper and then transfer it to software so you can hear it back and then take it to an orchestra? Or what's your flow like there?
Well, the good thing is that if I'm going to do, let me try this a different way. I'm not right as a human being. I'm not writing Shostakovich's Fifth. Um, so, but the answer to the software, the DAW, is that when I look at my handwriting from 20 years ago, I can't believe how anybody ever read it to copy it. Um, and really, literally just finishing a project where I had two copyists that had to go through um, the process of reading my handwriting, and then we all entered it into Sibelius, um, and using Node Performer, and that's come. The playback of scores has come such a long way. Um, I mean, pretty soon you're going to have every articulation you ever needed built into the software, and it's going to know what to do. I mean, in a sense, we're already there, um, and I'm sure it's much easier for people to do mock-ups. Certainly is for me.
Then do you take that from Sibelius, the score program, and then just
Sometimes
import it into like Pro Tools, and then you have like virtual instruments playing it, and if you wanted to add vocals or a band on top of it?
for this musical that I'm just finishing, which was first performed 20 years ago, that I wrote with Martin Charnin. It, when we decided to produce it as a recording, I decided that my way to do it was through Sibelius, and I went right from Sibelius to I didn't even go into a DAW. I or I mean Pro Tools after the vocals were added and to do the mix, but not to create the orchestra tracks. Um, because in a sense, I'm getting two things for the price of one that way. I'm getting perfectly copied music, which someday could be used in performance, and I'm getting tracks. And those tracks, you'd have to have really good ears to separate virtual instruments, like what's coming, and that's because of a program called Note Performer, which is sort of an add-on to Sibelius, which not only has its own great sounds, but it lets you use other VSTs, um, and it's cheap. And I think all the major uh, composition or orchestration arrangement programs are licensing Note Performer, because you'd have a very hard time telling a Note Performer timpani from the most expensive VST. And it's also, you don't really have to muck about with twiddling after you've done I always found that really laborious. Um, but I'm kind of lucky because I don't do a mock-up unless I know that it's going somewhere. I don't do a mock-up for the hell of doing a mock-up. Um, I might write something and use everything that Sibelius and No Performer offer me. Um, Tempi is still a little bit questionable. Just how you build a rondos and retards dynamics they've pretty much handled. But to do subtle tempo changes is still a little awkward. But I mean, in 6 months, that will no longer be a question. I mean, in 6 months, maybe none of us who write will be here. Everybody will be talking into their phone and saying, write me a song about a guy and a gal on a beach, in the rain, and it's going to come up with whatever it comes up with, and that's going to be a song. I mean, I think AI is a real force to be contended with.
Maliki, do you have any final questions for our guest?
Not really.
No? I have one final one before we go. And that is for those learners that are interested in orchestration. What would be your one piece of advice for those learners? Like, I know we have the keep it simple, stupid kind of broadly amongst creatives, especially for songwriters where, they've written a 6-minute song that really needs to be 2 minutes and 45 minutes to 45 seconds. But what would your piece of advice be for those interested in orchestration?
I guess the first piece of advice is anytime you can get anything played, that's live, that's a bonus. Um, that's certainly what I would go for first. But listen to orchestrators um, who you would like to be. I mean, I know who I've listened to.
Yeah, who are some of the ones? Who do you consider to be like the marks? Like listen to these, study.
Well, I think if you don't listen to Jonathan Tunick's orchestrations for any of the Sondheim shows, you're nuts. Um, because that's like a really solid, good background in orchestration. It's not outrageous, um, but it serves the music and the story. He's always on the mark. And then there are younger people who I have worked with. Um, Doug Besterman is terrific. Um, and they're new people coming up all the time. But really find somebody's work you like. And if the somebody is alive, call them on the phone, write them an email. I mean, remember, these people are just people.
Yeah, I like that word of advice. The cold call and the reach can go a very long way, especially I think I think there is an appreciation. I know some people can just get way too busy, but they might pass you to someone else too,
Yeah,
of musicians that are older wanting to nurture and be connected to the next generation. They want to be able to pass on
absolutely.
what they've learned, and they also want your fresh ideas. They want your fresh take on things, which they've lost
Well,
over 40 years.
to be fair, when you think about it, we do a lot of work alone. And, outside musical stimuli is really important.
That's great. Keith, thank you so much for joining us today at Tuneagers. I realize mid-conversation too, we should certainly invite you back to perhaps just perform and play some of your favorite songs. Or, you
Really.
know, that would be lovely, especially for our piano players. Thank you very, very much for your time today.
Thank you.